am sitting in my bathroom right now with the door locked, hands shaking as I type this Reddit post. What I am about to confess makes me feel like the worst person alive, but I cannot keep it inside anymore. I have been caring for my severely autistic sister for 23 years, and it has worn me down to my breaking point. I know this sounds cruel, but I hate her. I hate what my life has become because of her. Before I continue with this story, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from tonight? Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? If this resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real stories about family struggles that nobody talks about. Now, let me take you back to where this all began, and maybe you can help me figure out if I am the terrible person I think I am. My name is Allison, and I am 27 years old. To understand my story, you need to know what it was like growing up as the older sister of someone who required every ounce of my parents' attention, energy, and love. When I was 4 years old, my world changed forever, though I would not understand the full impact until much later. I remember being so excited when my mom told me I was going to be a big sister. I imagined teaching my little sister how to ride a bike, braiding her hair, and sharing secrets late at night. I spent months preparing for her arrival, picking out toys we could play with together, and practicing how I would hold her bottle. When Maya was born, she was the most beautiful baby I had ever seen, with these big dark eyes and tiny perfect fingers that would wrap around mine. But as Maya grew older, it became clear that something was different. She would not look at me when I tried to play with her. Instead of the babbling and cooing that other babies did, Maya would let out piercing screams that could last for hours. She would hit her head against her crib so hard that we had to pad every surface in her room. When she was 2 years old, after countless doctor visits and evaluations, we received the diagnosis that would reshape our entire family dynamic. Maya had severe autism. The doctors explained that she would likely never speak, never live independently, and would require round-the-clock care for the rest of her life. I was 6 years old when I first heard those words, and while I did not fully understand what they meant, I could see the devastation on my parents' faces. My mom cried for days, and my dad started working longer hours staying at the office until well after dinner time. That was when I first heard the phrase that would haunt my childhood. Allison, you need to understand that Maya is different. She needs us more than you do. You are such a good, strong girl, and we know you can handle this. At 6 years old, I was already being asked to be the understanding one, the flexible one, the one who could adapt, while my sister's needs remained rigid and unchanging. Our daily routine revolved entirely around Maya's schedule and limitations. She could not handle loud noises, so our house became a place of whispered conversations and tiptoed footsteps. She could not tolerate changes in routine, so family outings became impossible. Birthday parties, movies, even simple trips to the grocery store became major undertakings that usually ended with Maya having a meltdown and our family rushing home in defeat. I learned early on that my needs and wants came second. When I wanted to tell my parents about my day at school, I had to wait until Maya was calm. When I had homework questions, I had to figure them out myself because my parents were busy managing Maya's latest crisis. My childhood became a series of interrupted moments and postponed conversations. The most painful memories are of the special occasions that should have been mine. My 8th birthday party had to be canceled because Maya was going through a particularly difficult phase where any disruption to her routine sent her into violent outbursts. I watched through the window as my friends' parents came to pick them up, their arms full of wrapped gifts that would never be opened at a party that never happened. Christmas mornings were exercises in carefully managed chaos. We had to open presents in a specific order, at a specific volume level, with Maya's gifts always going first to prevent a meltdown. I learned to show gratitude quietly to keep my excitement contained, to always be mindful of how my reactions might affect my sister's delicate emotional state. By the time I turned 8, I had unconsciously taken on the role of Maya's secondary caregiver. I could change her diapers when my parents were overwhelmed. I knew which foods she would eat and which textures would send her into a fit. I understood her limited communication signals better than most adults in our lives. My parents praised me constantly for being so mature, so helpful, so understanding of our family's unique situation. But late at night, when the house was finally quiet and Maya was asleep, I would lie in my bed and wonder what it would be like to be the child who needed taking care of instead of the one doing the caring. I started to feel guilty about these thoughts, pushing them down deeper and deeper, until they became a constant dull ache in my chest. As I entered my teenage years, the weight of my responsibilities only grew heavier. Other kids my age were worried about acne and crushes and weekend plans, while I was learning advanced behavioral management techniques and researching respite care options for families with special needs children. The gap between my life and my peers' lives widened into a chasm that felt impossible to cross. When I was 16, I experienced what I now recognize as my first major breaking point. It was spring of my junior year, and I had been asked to prom by David, a sweet boy from my chemistry class, who somehow managed to see past my walls of responsibility and obligation. I was beyond excited. For weeks I dreamed about dress shopping with my mom, about having my hair done, about feeling normal and beautiful, and 16 for just one night. 2 weeks before prom, Maya entered one of her most severe behavioral phases. She was going through puberty, which brought new challenges that none of us were prepared for. Her outbursts became more violent and unpredictable. She would scratch and bite anyone who tried to help her during a meltdown, leaving my parents and me covered in bruises and claw marks that we learned to hide under long sleeves and concealer. The day before prom, Maya had what the doctors called a severe behavioral crisis. She became so agitated that she began hitting her head against the wall with enough force to leave dents in the drywall. When we tried to intervene, she turned her aggression outward, scratching deep gouges down my forearms before my dad could restrain her safely. The scratches were bad enough that we had to take her to the emergency room to make sure she had not damaged her own hands in the process. We spent 14 hours in that hospital waiting room. I sat there in my old jeans and a blood-stained sweater, watching other families come and go with their everyday emergencies, while we waited for a psychiatric consultation that might help us understand what had triggered Maya's episode. My phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends getting ready for prom, sending pictures of their dresses and their updos and their corsages. By the time we got home the next evening, prom was over. I never got to wear the pale blue dress hanging in my closet. I never got to dance with David, or take pictures with my friends, or feel like a normal teenager for even one night. David was understanding, but our relationship fizzled out within a few weeks. How could I explain that my life was not my own, that I could not make plans or promises, because my sister's needs would always come first? The resentment I had been pushing down for years began to surface in ways I could not control. I found myself snapping at Maya when she would interrupt my homework with her stimming behaviors. I would feel a surge of anger when her screaming woke me up at 3 a.m. for the 5th night in a row. I started to hate the sound of her voice, the way she would repeat the same phrase over and over until I wanted to scream myself. College application season brought new heartbreak. My grades were excellent despite everything, and I had been offered a full scholarship to study education at a university 3 states away. It was everything I had dreamed of since I was a little girl playing school with my stuffed animals. I could become a teacher, have my own classroom, make a difference in children's lives in a way that felt purposeful and chosen rather than obligated. When I showed my parents the acceptance letter, their faces fell immediately. "Oh, honey." My mom said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "You know we cannot manage Maya without you. What would we do if she had an emergency and you were so far away?" My dad nodded in agreement, already calculating the impossibility of their situation without my daily help. I ended up enrolling at the community college 20 minutes from our house, commuting from home, and taking classes around Maya's therapy schedule. I watched my high school friends leave for universities across the country, posting pictures of dorm rooms and new friendships and independence that felt as foreign to me as life on another planet. My college experience became a series of missed classes and dropped courses whenever Maya's needs intensified. During her worst behavioral periods, I would have to leave in the middle of exams to help my parents manage her care. My academic advisor suggested I consider switching to part-time status, not understanding that even part-time felt like a luxury when measured against the demands of my home life. It was during my sophomore year of community college that I had my first serious relationship. James was a classmate in my developmental psychology course, which felt like cruel irony given my home situation. He was kind and patient, and seemed genuinely interested in understanding my complicated family dynamics. For a few months, I allowed myself to believe that I could have something that was just mine, separate from Maya and her needs. James lasted exactly 3 months and 2 weeks. The relationship ended the night he came to dinner at our house and witnessed one of Maya's meltdowns in full force. She had been having a difficult day, and the presence of a stranger in our routine sent her into a panic that escalated quickly beyond our control. She threw her dinner plate against the wall, then began hitting herself so hard that James actually stepped forward to try to help before my dad waved him away. The sound Maya made during her worst meltdowns was unlike anything most people had ever heard. It was not quite screaming and not quite crying, but something primal and desperate that seemed to come from the deepest part of her being. It could last for hours, rising and falling in waves that left everyone in the house feeling emotionally battered and physically exhausted. That night, watching James's face as he witnessed the reality of my daily life, I saw something I had never wanted to see. Fear, pity, the calculation of someone deciding whether love could possibly be worth such overwhelming complexity. He left that night and sent me a text message the next day, explaining that he cared about me, but was not ready for such an intense situation. I found myself alone in the bathroom that night, looking at my reflection and barely recognizing the exhausted 20-year-old staring back at me. For the first time in my life, I allowed myself to think the thought I had been pushing away since childhood. I wished Maya had never been born. That thought, once acknowledged, opened a floodgate I could not close. By the time I turned 25, the resentment had grown into something darker and more consuming than I knew how to handle. I had been Maya's caregiver for over 20 years, and the weight of that responsibility had shaped every decision I had ever made. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in March 2 years ago. I had been working part-time at a local nonprofit while finishing my degree, and my supervisor had called me into her office that morning with news that felt like a miracle. There was an opening for a program coordinator position with a child advocacy organization in Portland. It was everything I had ever wanted professionally, with a salary that would finally allow me independence and the chance to use my experiences in a way that felt meaningful and chosen. The position required relocating within 6 weeks, but they were willing to help with moving expenses and had even identified some housing options in Portland that would be perfect for a young professional starting fresh. I walked to my car after that meeting, feeling lighter than I had in years, already imagining what it would feel like to wake up in a city where no one knew me as Maya's sister, where I could just be Allison for the first time in my adult life. I drove home that afternoon, planning how I would tell my parents about this incredible opportunity. I had enough savings to help them hire a professional caregiver for Maya, at least part-time. There were excellent day programs in our area that could provide structure and support for her while giving my parents some relief. I had researched it all, thoroughly determined to present them with solutions rather than just problems. But when I walked into our house that afternoon, my parents were in crisis mode. Maya had been escalating all week, and her behaviors were becoming more dangerous to herself and others. She had started a new medication that was supposed to help with anxiety, but instead seemed to be making her more agitated and unpredictable. My parents looked like they had aged 5 years in the past month. "Thank God you are home," my mom said as soon as I walked through the door. "She has been asking for you all day." "Well, not asking exactly, but you know how she gets when her routine is disrupted and you are not here." Maya had very limited verbal communication, but she had developed her own ways of expressing when she needed specific people or things. When I was not around, she would rock more intensely and make a particular humming sound that my parents had learned meant she was looking for me. I spent that entire evening helping to calm Maya down from her heightened state, using techniques I had learned through years of trial and error. By the time she was settled enough for my parents to attempt putting her to bed, it was nearly midnight, and I realized I had not even mentioned the job opportunity that had consumed my thoughts all day. The next morning brought a new crisis. Maya woke up in what my parents called one of her moods, which meant she was primed for a major meltdown at the slightest provocation. These days were like walking through a minefield, trying to anticipate and prevent any trigger that might send her spiraling into hours of self-injurious behavior. I was supposed to drive to Portland that afternoon for the final interview, a formality since they had already essentially offered me the position. But as I was getting ready to leave, Maya's morning routine went completely off track. She became fixated on a sweater that was in the laundry, working herself into a panic that escalated rapidly beyond our ability to redirect her. The meltdown that followed was one of the worst I had ever seen. Maya began hitting her head against her bedroom door with such force that we were afraid she would seriously injure herself. When we tried to intervene, she turned the aggression outward, scratching and biting anyone who came near her. The episode lasted for over 6 hours, during which time I missed my interview, missed my chance to explain my absence, and watched my future disappear while I held my sister's wrists to prevent her from hurting herself. By the time Maya finally exhausted herself into sleep, it was 8 o'clock in the evening. I had 17 missed calls from the Portland organization and an email explaining that they needed to move forward with other candidates given my unexplained absence. The opportunity that had felt like salvation that morning was gone, and I was back in my childhood bedroom covered in scratches and bruises, with my 25-year-old life feeling exactly the same as it had when I was 15. That night, sitting in my car in our driveway because I could not face going back inside the house, I found myself typing into my phone with shaking hands. "My sister is severely autistic, and I have been hating her for a long time. Am I the terrible person?" I posted it to Reddit before I could change my mind, then sat in the darkness waiting for strangers on the internet to confirm what I already knew about myself. The responses started coming within minutes, but they were nothing like what I expected. Instead of condemnation, I found understanding. Instead of judgment, I found validation for feelings I had carried in shame for decades. Person after person shared similar stories of growing up as the sibling of someone with significant disabilities, of having their childhoods defined by someone else's needs, of struggling with love and resentment existing side by side in their hearts. One comment in particular stopped me cold. "You are not an awful person for feeling this way. You are a parentified child who has been carrying adult responsibilities since you were 6 years old. What you are describing is not hatred, it is grief for the childhood and young adulthood you never got to have. That grief is valid and normal, and something you deserve support in processing." I had never heard the term parentified child before, but as I read more about it that night sitting in my car with tears streaming down my face, I began to understand that my experience was not unique or shameful, but rather the predictable result of a family system that had asked too much of me for too long. The Reddit responses that night gave me something I had never had before: perspective. For 25 years, I had believed that my feelings of resentment and exhaustion made me a bad person, a selfish daughter and sister who was failing to live up to the moral standard my family situation demanded. But the strangers who responded to my post helped me understand that I had been carrying burdens no child should ever have to carry, and that my emotional response to those burdens was not only normal, but healthy. One commenter shared a link to a support group for siblings of people with disabilities. I had never even known such groups existed, but within a week, I was sitting in a circle with 8 other adults who understood exactly what I had been through. For the first time in my life, I was in a room where I did not have to explain or justify my feelings, where mentioning the word resentment in relation to my disabled sister did not result in shocked silence and moral judgment. Through that group, I learned about setting boundaries, something that had never been modeled for me and my family. I learned that loving someone does not require sacrificing your entire sense of self on the altar of their needs. I learned that it was possible to be a supportive family member while still maintaining your own identity and pursuing your own goals. The first boundary I set was the hardest. I told my parents that I would be moving out within 3 months and that while I was committed to continuing to help with Maya's care, I would no longer be available as a full-time caregiver. The conversation was devastating for all of us, filled with tears and accusations and fears about Maya's future that we had all been carrying for years. My mother's initial response was to cry and ask how I could abandon my family when they needed me most. My father was more practical, immediately launching into calculations about respite care costs and questioning whether we could afford professional help. But underneath their practical concerns was a deeper fear if I was not there to help. How would they manage? What if Maya had an emergency? What if she never accepted care from anyone else? I had spent months preparing for this conversation with my therapist, a woman who specialized in family dynamics around disability and trauma. She had helped me understand that my parents' fears, while understandable, were not my responsibility to manage. They had allowed their daughter to become their third parent, and while that had served their immediate needs, it had been profoundly unfair to me and ultimately unhealthy for our entire family system. The next 3 months were the most difficult of my life. I found a small apartment across town, just far enough away to feel independent, but close enough to help during genuine emergencies. I researched day programs for adults with autism and found an excellent facility that specialized in supporting people with Maya's level of needs. I helped my parents navigate the application process for state-funded respite care and connected them with other families who had successfully implemented similar support systems. Maya's transition to having professional caregivers was challenging, as we had expected it would be. Change had always been difficult for her, and the introduction of new people into her routine triggered several weeks of increased behavioral challenges. But gradually, she began to adapt to her new day program, and my parents began to appreciate having trained professionals help manage her care. The hardest part was dealing with my own guilt. Even though I intellectually understood that setting boundaries was healthy and necessary, I still felt like I was abandoning my family every time my phone rang, and I chose not to answer immediately. I had been so conditioned to prioritize Maya's needs above everything else that learning to prioritize my own felt selfish and wrong, even when I knew it was not. My apartment was tiny and furnished mostly with secondhand furniture, but it was mine in a way that nothing in my life had ever been before. I could eat dinner at whatever time I wanted, watch television at normal volume, have friends over, without worrying about disrupting someone else's routine. The simple pleasure of being able to take a shower without listening for sounds of distress from another room felt like luxury. 6 months after moving out, I applied for a position with a local organization that provided support services for families with special needs children. It was not the Portland job I had lost, but it felt like meaningful work that would allow me to use my experiences in a way that helped other families navigate the challenges I knew so well. For the first time in my adult life, I was able to commit to a full-time position without having to worry about missing work for family emergencies. The work was emotionally challenging in ways I had not anticipated. Sitting across from parents who were just beginning their journey with a newly diagnosed child brought back memories of my own family's early years that I had not processed in decades. But it also gave me a sense of purpose that felt different from the obligation that had defined my childhood. I was choosing to help these families, bringing expertise and empathy that had been earned through years of personal experience. When I started dating Marcus 8 months after moving out, I approached the relationship with honesty that would have been impossible for me at any earlier point in my life. I told him about Maya from our first date, explaining not just her condition, but also how caring for her had shaped my own development. I was prepared for him to run as James and others had before him, but Marcus surprised me by listening thoughtfully and asking questions that showed genuine interest in understanding my experience. Marcus worked as a physical therapist and had his own experience working with people with disabilities, though from a professional rather than personal perspective. He understood the complexity of loving someone whose needs require significant accommodation, and he never made me feel guilty for the boundaries I had worked so hard to establish with my family. The biggest test of our relationship came 6 months in, when Maya had a serious behavioral crisis that resulted in her being hospitalized for several days. It was the kind of emergency that would have previously consumed my entire life for weeks, but this time I was able to show up for my family while still maintaining my own stability. I visited Maya in the hospital, participated in care planning meetings with her treatment team, and supported my parents through their fears and exhaustion. But I also went home to my own apartment each night, continued going to work, and maintained the other relationships and responsibilities that had become part of my independent life. Looking back now, I realize that was the moment I truly understood the difference between loving someone and losing yourself in their needs. I could be a good sister to Maya without sacrificing my own identity and future. I could support my parents without becoming their co-parent. I could acknowledge the genuine challenges of our family situation without drowning in them. Today, Maya is 24 years old and living in a supported residential facility that specializes in caring for adults with autism and intellectual disabilities. The transition was difficult for all of us, but particularly for my parents, who struggled with feelings of guilt and failure around their decision to seek out of home care for their daughter. It took months of family therapy for us to work through the complex emotions around that decision and to understand that it was motivated by love rather than abandonment. Maya seems content in her new environment, which provides the structure and consistency she needs, while also giving her opportunities for social interaction with peers who share similar challenges. She has developed relationships with her caregivers and seems to enjoy the activities and routine of her day program. While she still has behavioral challenges, they are managed by professionals who have training and resources that our family never had access to. My relationship with Maya now is different, but healthier than it ever was during our childhood. When I visit her, I come as her sister rather than her caregiver. I can enjoy her company and celebrate her small victories without feeling the crushing weight of responsibility for her daily care and well-being. For the first time in our relationship, I can see her as a person separate from the needs she requires met, and I think that has allowed me to love her more purely than I ever could before. My parents and I have worked hard to rebuild our relationship on a foundation that acknowledges the mistakes of the past while focusing on the possibilities of the future. They have expressed genuine remorse for the burdens they placed on me as a child, and I have learned to forgive them for decisions they made out of desperation and exhaustion rather than malice. We still disagree sometimes about boundaries and responsibilities, but we have learned to communicate about those disagreements in ways that do not leave me feeling guilty for having my own life and needs. The most important lesson I have learned through this journey is that loving someone does not require sacrificing yourself completely to their needs. True love, sustainable love, can only exist when it flows from a place of choice rather than obligation, from abundance rather than depletion. For too many years, I tried to love Maya from an empty cup, and that kind of love inevitably breeds resentment and exhaustion. Now at 27, I am learning what it feels like to love my sister from a place of fullness rather than emptiness. I have my own life, my own relationship, my own career, and friendships and interests that have nothing to do with autism or caregiving or family crisis management. And from that place of independence and self-sufficiency, I can offer Maya and my parents support that is genuine and sustainable rather than forced and depleting. If you are watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, I want you to know that your feelings are valid and your needs matter. You are not selfish for wanting your own life, and you are not a bad person for feeling resentment about sacrifices you never chose to make. There is a difference between being supportive and being consumed, between being helpful and being exploited, between being loving and being lost. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family? Have you struggled with guilt over setting boundaries with a disabled family member? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more honest conversations about family dynamics that people usually keep private. Share this video with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone in these complicated feelings. Thank you for listening to my story and for creating a space where difficult truths can be shared without judgment. I hope that by speaking honestly about these challenges, we can help other families find healthier ways to navigate the complex intersection of love, disability, and individual needs. Remember, you are worthy of your own life, and claiming that life does not make you a bad person. It makes you human.